Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 98 for Friday, December 6, 2024. My name is Justin Young, and joining me as always are Alicia Utecht. Alicia, how are you doing?
It is that time of the semester.
Oh, okay, we can let you have it this week. It literally is headed into finals.
Less than a week left, but I guess it is okay.
No, I'm doing okay. It's been a rough couple days, but you know what? We're almost done with the semester. I've gotten things done that I needed to get done, so we're hanging in there.
Also, I just feel that because of the way that the end of the semester was rushed this year.
Yeah.
Typically we have 2 weeks after Thanksgiving break and then finals week, but having just 1 week and then finals.
Yeah.
It's an exhausting end of the semester.
Yeah.
And it's different every year. And like some years it's 1 week, some years it's 2 weeks. And I feel like that always throws off my planning for my classes because I'm always thinking, oh, we have plenty of time to get to that. And then we get back and we're like, oh, it's only a week. And I'm like, okay, we have no time to get to all this other stuff I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. My 101 class, we were supposed to start the final speeches on Tuesday. And I was like, okay, look, speaking from experience as an instructor and as a student, I know none of you are actually ready on Tuesday of this week coming back from Thanksgiving break. So at least we have the finals week time because we're going to need to do a lot of speeches in finals week. Yeah,
we had presentations in the intercultural class, and I kind of felt bad for those students presenting on Monday because it was like it was all finals week before that, and then I was gone all the week before.
Yeah.
So it was Thanksgiving break, so obviously there was no real communication. And then I was gone the whole week before that because of NCA. So it's just like, here's a 2 week break where we are not really able to talk to each other. Please do email me if you have questions. But
yeah,
people did well for the most part. So
that's good.
Proud of them.
That last voice you heard was Mario Sanders. Mario, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Like I said, exhausted. Just with the end of the semester. Thanksgiving break was good, but also just not enough with all of the travel that happened before it with NCA. And then I was also in DC for a cousin's wedding, which was great. Both of those things were great. It's just exhausting.
Yeah.
So very much looking forward to the end of the break. A couple more papers to write, some stuff to grade, and then done.
That's why I always tell people that the semester is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Yeah. Pace yourself. Yeah. I remember hiring in new faculty and they would be all these things they were planning to do and everything. You'd have to go, okay, back up a little bit. You're going to burn yourself out by October. You need to think about this as the full semester and really a full year. Because we can say all you want about having a month off at Christmas, but oftentimes that involves grading, it involves prepping your syllabi for the spring, it involves travel for Christmas, and so you end up not having nearly as much time as you might think you would.
Yeah, it's also just busy and hectic with the holidays and if people celebrate and all that sort of stuff, and
right.
So that is also a break, while much appreciated, it also never quite feels long enough.
Yeah.
But I don't know if any break ever feels fully long enough.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to somebody who was like, November felt like it was both a year long and a single day long. And I feel like that's just true of all breaks, where it's so on the one hand, you get to the end and I'm at least very antsy. I need to get back to my routine. I need structure in my life again. But on the other hand, I'm so exhausted. This is not long enough.
Yeah. Sometimes people will say, oh, it must be great having your summer off and everything. And I'm like, it's great when I have things to do. But when you don't have things to do, you get tired of sitting around not doing a whole lot pretty quickly. And, I always say it'd be great to be retired if I was filthy rich. And so I could go entertain myself. But if I was retired and poor, you would just get really anxious very quickly. I went home over Thanksgiving break. So that was great to see family and friends. And the weekend before Thanksgiving, I went to see a all-female AC/DC cover band.
Nice.
Which
That's
was
cool.
really kind of interesting. Like, and they were really good. So that was a nice surprise. I told somebody I wasn't really sure how good they'd be, and they're like, "Oh, is that because they're women?" I was like, "No, it's because they're a cover band."
Yeah.
Like I think the women can play the instruments probably just as well as the men. I just sometimes you go see a cover band, they're horrible, and sometimes you go see one and you're like, "Man, like I would gladly go see you again." And this was an example of that.
Was this that place in Marion?
No, this was actually Walker's Bluff, the casino.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have a pretty stacked lineup of acts that they bring in on a regular basis. I feel like students here don't appreciate that. I don't ever hear anybody talk about that like they're bringing in acts on a fairly regular basis. And this was actually, they were playing free. Like you didn't have to pay a dime to go see them. They were just playing. There's a bar on the casino floor you can go like listen to.
Oh, good to know.
Is that 18 and up or 21 and up?
21 and up, because to get on the casino floor, you have to be able to gamble.
Gotcha. I didn't know. I don't know if that's a nationwide thing at 21 or if that's a state thing.
That's a state thing because
okay.
when I turned 18, easy for me to say. One of my coworkers at the time had turned 18 like a couple months before and gone out to the casino. So then she was like, "We should go to the casino," and we never did.
Gotcha.
Maybe it is 18. I don't know.
Well, states are different because I know Vegas is 21. Because when I was there visiting my cousin, they kicked me out.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes casinos are that way because they don't want to be checking for drinks.
Yeah.
That makes
So
sense.
they just set it at 21. I guess you can gamble at 18 though, right? Because you can buy lottery tickets at 18. So
That also makes sense.
Well, and Walker's Bluff is a winery first, isn't it?
yeah.
So it would make sense to me that they'd be 21 up.
I mean, the place where the music is, where the free shows are at least, is like a bar, sort of like, it's sort of on the floor, but slightly off the floor. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, you don't have to drink while you're sitting there, but they are serving drinks.
Yeah.
It's like a little showroom lounge, I guess is the way to describe it. But anyways, the band, they were very good. And not only did they sound good, but like they really put on a show. And
nice.
So like, that's always the thing, like for me with cover bands, are you trying to recreate the atmosphere of this band? Because that's the reason people are coming to see you, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like if I just want to hear the music, I can put on a CD. I want to see somebody actually get up there and perform.
Yeah.
All right. Christina is out this episode, so just the three of us. So we've been off for a few weeks. So let's kind of just jump right into stuff. Alicia, what have you been playing?
Pokemon TCG Pocket still has a grip on my life right now. I've been having a lot of fun with it though. I did finally work out if I'm playing with a new deck, then I'll still go back into the beginner level matches against people, but with the decks that I've established and like the strategies that I've worked out, I've moved up to like the TCG player level for playing against other human beings. And I think I talked last time about being kind of frustrated with how many people were just running like Mewtwo and Gardevoir strats or like Moltres EX and Charizard EX and just like all the ones you're seeing on the internet of like, these are the best decks for Pokemon TCG Pocket. I find that happens less in the TCG player category since it's meant to, not only because it's meant to be a little more like higher level, but just people there I think are also sick of it and so like want to try out new strategies and new deck builds.
Is it like a more casual?
No.
Or no?
No,
Okay.
beginner's the more casual one.
And that's where people are playing the super meta decks?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Beginner's more casual, like you're just starting out. TCG players, like, okay, the people who are familiar with the card game or like who want more of a challenge.
Interesting. I would expect it to be the other way around. But it's cool that you've got like more experienced people or people who are at a higher level who are not just like, let me run the most optimized deck possible.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, you still get some in there,
Of
but
course.
I find I get more variety, like playing against people who are running electric types, playing against people who are running fighting types. Like, it's not just a constant stream of Mewtwo and the occasional Charizard, and maybe once in a blue moon you see something else.
I wonder if that's because those people who have moved up to that tier quickly are the people who have experience with the card game, right, before coming into this in large part. And so they're people who have like a long history of playing Pokemon, right? So like they're very much coming at it from like, well, this is how I play in real life, right? Like I know lots of different ways to play, so that's the way I'm going to play, for this video game representation of it. So I wonder if that affects how people are coming into that. Because something like Marvel Snap, like there's no history until that game releases, right? Like there's no like familiarity with that game. There's been other Marvel card games, but not that specific one. Whereas this, I would assume a large number of people playing Pokemon TCG are people who have played the actual physical card game in the past.
Probably. And I know that's how they like promote the trading card game player level of difficulty, is like they say like it's for the people who are familiar with the physical card game, or who want more of a challenge. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's more of people being like, okay, this, obviously you can't build your deck from the physical card game for a multitude of reasons. The physical card game, you get a deck of 60, here you get a deck of 20. Obviously, there's more cards in the physical card game than what's in TCG Pocket right now. But I think definitely that's where you're... And the other thing is, I think that the beginner players are the ones who are like, I just want to win, and like, let me just win as easily as possible.
Right.
More often, whereas the TCG player level is more of like, yeah, winning is great, and I want to like screw around and have fun and test out what different combos can do and stuff like that.
Well, and I think that's probably a big part of it, is people who are looking up decks on whatever website tell you these are the best decks, kind of streamlines that strategy. I feel like you talked about that at one point with Marvel Snap, of just like, you're like clearly the best decks and you're looking for this card and then this card and then this card. You're going to play them in a particular sequence. And so when there's no familiarity, like having that written out for you is like quite easy. When then once you have played it for a while, you start to see how some of these, other cards start to synergize with one another. I don't know how that really works in Pokemon. I'm speaking more from a Magic background. But like, you get to see this card that like, I've never even heard of this card before. I've never even seen this before, but that's really cool. I want to see how I can make this work. And so and I could definitely see that being part of it. If just more familiarity with the game, there's like more encouragement to step outside of this like smaller playpen.
Yeah.
I think also in Marvel Snap, there was an incentive to reach a certain level of ranking, because once you did that, you unlocked things. And so I forgot what it was, level 50 or whatever it was, tier 50, whatever they called it. And so once you hit that, you unlocked everything that was locked currently. But once you did that, there was nothing else. Like the ranking didn't really matter anymore at that point, right? Going forward. But until you got there, until you could get to that point, that was the whole like sort of meta of the game, right? So it very much incentivized trying to win only and not experimentation.
Yeah.
And so I think actually that made that element worse. Like you said, I talked about, it made it worse because like there was no reason to experiment. You just wanted to win.
Yeah.
And then after you'd gotten to that level, you could experiment. But by that point, most people were kind of burned out, I feel like.
Sure.
And so maybe, Pokemon doesn't have that same sort of incentive structure in that way.
Yeah, there's, you get achievements for winning however many battles, but there's not, like, they don't have any special, like, okay, you reached level 30 or whatever. It's just every time you level up, you get the same set of rewards. I said, I do still think they need to add that you get experience points even if you lose, because that's stupid that you only get them if you win.
May I jump in really quick with what I will talk about more about with what I've played. So in terms of those incentives, I think Hearthstone does that really well, because rather than, I think there's some that's like win a number of matches, but instead they do it's play a certain number of this type of creature. So like play 30 Murlocs or play 30 demons. So it's like, and it's an auto battler. So the deck you build or the squad you put together is going to be different most times, but rather than like, I'm going to try and like force the best comp every single time, it's, oh, you know what? Sure, let's play this and we'll be able to add to our, battle pass or whatever. So I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but I do think like varying those incentives so that it isn't just, I need to win every single time so that I can continue to rank up does benefit the variety of gameplay.
And TCG Pocket has a lot more incentives that are like, collect so many electric type cards, collect so many fire type, collect so many blah, blah, blah. It's more interested in getting the booster packs and then
building out that collection, essentially.
Yeah.
Got to catch them all.
And like they have an event going right now that's versus you can do solo battles versus a deck that, depending on like beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, it runs the Bulbasaur line. So when you do those, you can sometimes get promo packs that have special single cards. So yeah, it has a lot to do that's not just about win against other people, which is really nice. Because like I run a Charizard EX, Moltres EX deck against the Venusaur and Lilligant EX deck because that's an AI. I don't care. It's not really going to...
I don't care about the AI having fun.
Yeah. But like against other real people, I'm like, I'm here to have a good time. Hopefully you're here to have a good time. Like even I got beaten earlier today by this much, just barely beaten. But I'm like, you know what? You played it well. That was a good one.
And I think like that's the way those games at their best. And I think that's what Marvel Snap did for me that sometimes other style of those kind of games have not done very well for me, is that I felt like I understood the game and that sometimes I just got outplayed. But it wasn't because I didn't understand the game, and it wasn't because they had some unfair advantage in it. And I think that's what keeps people coming back, right? Like if you're playing that sort of a game, particularly on your phone, right? Like you don't want to be super frustrated. So like, I don't mind losing, but I want to lose because somebody played better than me, not because the game is so esoteric that like I can't comprehend all of its rules, or because this person spent $90 and has an advantage over me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a big thing for me too. Like I'm a fairly competitive person when I feel like I'm able to like get into it and know what's happening. And so like I will admit this is not a great aspect of who I am, but I get pretty mad when people just like barrel their way through and it's not fun for me or for anyone else. So like I
think most people feel that way. I don't.
Yeah, but I'm extreme. I recognize that about myself.
I will note that I just said, yeah, I think lots of people feel like you, Alicia, and she had to correct me.
No, I feel this way more than anybody does.
So she's competitive in her reaction to competitiveness.
Yeah, but anyways, I'm having more fun moving into like the TCG player level. And then, like I said, I'll still go back to the beginner level if I want to try out, like I was trying out a deck using the fossil wands And so like testing that in beginner was better for like working out what to do with it, and then bringing it into TCG Player where I get to play against other people who are actually strategizing was a lot of fun.
I guess it would make sense considering there's a limited card pool, right?
Yeah.
Are there like banned cards?
Not yet.
I say it makes sense that they could just remove certain things, but
Although I do think it's funny because, with how much TCG Pocket I'm playing, Pokemon TCG is popping up in my YouTube recommended now. Mm-hmm. And so I was watching a video on like banned cards in the TCG, mm-hmm. and one of them is the red card where your opponent has to discard their whole, reshuffle in their whole hand and draw a new hand. And I'm like, interesting that this is banned from the physical card game, but it's here in TCG Pocket because it is a really cheap card and I don't like it. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's easier for them to kind of experiment around, right? Mm-hmm. Because they can ban and unban a card with just a flip of a switch on the back end of the software, I'm sure. And so that makes it easier for them to kind of play around with that and see like, hey, can we make this more playable with this card, by balancing it in some way? I would imagine if you have that physical card game and you're making a digital representation of it, it allows you to like sort of A/B test a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like very quickly, which is kind of probably pretty neat, I would imagine. All right. Anything else?
The big other thing is I'm finally on case 5 of the first Ace Attorney Investigations game. And once again, as per usual, case 5 is the best. Although I will say case 4 was also pretty fun since that was a flashback case. So we got Bratworth, we got little Franziska, which I love Franziska von Karma so much, and getting to see her as a child just made my heart happy. But case 5 is, it's tedious on the one hand. There is a lot of, it's a very long case, as is usual for case 5, but I'm having a lot of fun seeing familiar faces, I guess minor spoilers, but like we get to see Larry Butts again. We get to see Wendy Oldbag again and have Edgeworth like trying to deal with that. We get to see Edgeworth being a Steel Samurai nerd. So we even get to see Missile the dog again. And I'm like, we haven't seen him since the very first game. I'm so happy he's doing good. The goodest boy. So, like I said, in theory, I'm in the middle of the case. Because, like, when you save, the save file will say beginning, middle, or end. So, in theory, I'm in the middle of the case. I don't know if I'm actually in the middle of the case or not, but I'm having fun. I'm finally having fun with Investigations 1, which is nice.
Nice. For a while, you were kind of meh on it.
Yeah, there was a while where I was just kind of like, okay, we are sure getting through this. But I think as the game goes on, it gets better at... Because when they first conceived the game, they didn't conceive it as a Miles Edgeworth game. It was supposed to be an Ema Sky game. And so I think especially the first half of the game, it really doesn't feel like it matters that it's Edgeworth. Versus case 4, once you get that, since that's a flashback case, it entirely matters that it's Edgeworth. And like you get to see him when he's still, it's supposed to be his first trial as a prosecutor, and so he still like idolizes Manfred von Karma, and you have his Franziska as his weird girl assistant kind of, and so now that it finally feels like it matters that it's Edgeworth, this is bringing back things that happened to him 7 years ago. It feels more satisfying as a game, and even just with how much Steel Samurai is playing a role in case 5, where that's one of the things with Edgeworth's character is that he's a massive dork about Steel Samurai. So it feels more like it matters that it's him, and that it's his game and his story than just, we sure did slap Miles Edgeworth on here to sell copies.
Right. Yeah. That is interesting, especially like with the backstory of them starting it with a different character and like changing that, right? That would impact the way that the story feels.
Yeah. And especially like when I played the first few cases, I was like, I know this was supposed to be an Ema Sky game, but I still think of Ema Sky as a 16-year-old and like, would a 16-year-old really be doing all this? And then I had to remind myself, I was like, oh yeah, 7-year gap. I guess they could have made her an adult for this and it still would be pretty early in her career and it would feel weird for her to get mixed up in this. But then it doesn't feel natural for Edgeworth to get mixed up in it either, so...
Let's also note that these are Japanese games where oftentimes they play very liberally with age, I feel like.
Yeah, but still... it's my own brain is like, I can accept one prodigy. I can accept Franziska von Karma becoming a prosecutor at 13. I don't know about Ema Sky getting mixed up with like a smuggling ring and Interpol and all that at like 16 when she's established as a high school student.
I mean, Tintin does it. So, all right, cool. Is that everything?
I think so. I think I played a little more Super Mario Jamboree. Like I finally just looked up how to unlock Ninja and Pauline, but I think TCG Pocket and Investigations 1 have been the big ones.
Okay. Mario, what have you been playing?
So over Thanksgiving break, really the only game I played, and I played it in a single sitting, it's not that long, is the Game Boy Color Pokemon TCG game. And that was pretty fun. I had never played it before, but I've got friends who really enjoy it. Played it for a friend's event thing. It was one of the categories. We had to play a game that we had never played or never beaten before, and I was originally going to choose something else. But when I saw some other people playing that for one of their other categories, I was like, oh, you know what? This is a game that I had intended to play for other reasons a while back and have just continued to put it off. So it fits this category well. So I played it. And I think it's like I said, it's a pretty good game. And it's like really my first experience with actually playing the card game. I had the cards when I was a kid, but my cousin and I had no idea what we were doing with them.
Same.
So it was fun to play and kind of learn, oh, this is how this game sort of works. Although I think it isn't exactly how the card game works, but it's close-ish.
It's probably about as close as TCG Pocket is, honestly.
Maybe. I haven't played Pocket, so I can't really speak to that. But, yeah. And then, other than that, Hearthstone Battlegrounds just had a new season. And so they're rolling out, I think all of the tribes are available, but they started with like 5 of them. They rolled out 2 more, and then they rolled out 2 more. Excuse me, they started with 6 of them. They rolled out 2 more, and then they rolled out 2 more for all 10. And I'm kind of glad, I was talking about it with Scott because Scott plays as well. And the previous season, the gimmick was trinkets. And so you got 2 items over the course of the match that had these effects. And there were so many times where winning or losing just felt like trinket difference. Like you got offered better things than I did. And you were just able to scale whatever your stuff was a lot better. And so they've removed those for this new season, and they've changed up some of the tribes, and I've only played it a few times, but I'm pretty happy with with what the new season is thus far.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope, that's about it.
All right. I've played a few things both over Thanksgiving break and over the past week. I always end up this time of year trying to cram in a bunch of games so that when it comes time to making our game of the year list and everything, I've played most of the stuff I want to try out, at least. So I played UFO 50 finally. And so I know, Mario, you've already talked about this on here. This is, I think, a really interesting game. I'm enjoying it. And I should say I've only played like 5 of the 50 games so far, so I'm not super deep into it. I think the thing, and I mentioned this previously, and I kind of wonder this. And so, like, Mario, you have this sort of interest in older games and going back and playing these with, with your streams and that sort of thing. I kind of wonder how this would connect with somebody who had no connection with older games of this type. So, like, if you grew up in the PlayStation era and you sat down and tried to play this today, right? Or my nephews who grew up even, in a more modern era, if they sat down and tried to play this, would this resonate at all with them? Or would they just be like, this is terrible? And because a lot of what resonates with me is, okay, like, I think fictionally these games start in 1983. So that's the Famicom era when, for those who don't know, the NES in Japan was the Famicom. It comes out in 1983. In Japan, it doesn't come out, until, 2 or 3 years later, depending on how you look at it in the US as the NES. And then, but like these games don't even necessarily look like Famicom games in a lot of cases. They're much more simplistic. They're much more kind of Commodore 64 style games. Would somebody who had grown up on PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3 games, and that had been their sort of entry, would they playing these, would they just be more frustrated than like, oh, this is really interesting what you're going for with this? And I don't know. And that makes it even more interesting as a product to me. Because right now I'm really enjoying it, but I'm really enjoying it going, hey, this reminds me an awful lot of Montezuma's Revenge, right? Like as a game. And a lot of the style and a lot of the like little quirks of it are kind of calling back to that style, that era of games. But I don't know if that if somebody coming to it fresh would have that connection, and so would it matter to them? And like, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it until I get further into it, but like that's kind of my initial reaction of it. I think the games are neat, and I would say the thing that's kind of neat about it is it very much reminds me as a kid going to the video store, looking at a wall of NES games to rent, picking one out because it had a cool name or had cool box art, taking it home and playing it. And sometimes it would be something fantastic. Sometimes it would be your Blaster Master or something like that. And sometimes it would be terrible. And some of these games aren't very good. And they feel like that game that you rented at the video store and you're like, oh man, like, can we go back? Can we return this early tomorrow so I can get something different? Something I might actually like. And so I think that's neat, that experience of, since these are all new. So yeah, that's what I have to say for that for right now, at least.
I was going to say, I just in thinking about it, I was looking up, I know you said you'd only played the first 4 or 5. Those first few games, as you're saying, feel so much more like arcade games. And I think Mortal is the first one. I think that's like the 6th or 7th one. Is that first one that really feels like this is something that would be on a console.
Yeah, and that's appropriate for the era.
Yeah.
I mean, they are getting the era right with the style of games, right? That's one thing I feel like I can say that, again, my nephew going back and playing this wouldn't have that same context for.
Yes.
Because they didn't live through that era. But like these very much feel like appropriate games for that era.
Yeah.
Like sometimes there's something where you're like, oh, that interface element is probably a little too modern. Like, I don't remember games at that time. It would have been more clunky. But like also like you don't want to be that adherent.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. I'll be interested to see when you get to some of the later games that like these are genres that did not exist at that point in time.
Sure.
And so like they're a little anachronistic in that way of like here's how they might look, and so I'll be interested to hear your thoughts when you get to some of those.
Yeah, and that's always interesting. Like, I mean, you see that with some retro games now, right? Like when they go back and do a Metroidvania in like 8-bit style, and you're like, well, yeah, those sort of existed. I mean, Metroid existed in the 8-bit style, but these elements within it that you're putting in here definitely don't, right? Like most people sort of like the Metroidvania style solidifies with Super Metroid. That's the game that sort of canonized that style of game. And there are, you know, now sometimes people go back and make a game that's very much in a previous like 8-bit style that has a lot of those elements and everything. And you're like, well, no, this time we wouldn't have had that. So, yeah. The second game that I played is Rise of the Golden Idol. This is the sequel to the Golden Idol game that came out last year. These are, which was Curse of the Golden Idol. That's the one that was last year. So these games are basically puzzle games. They're pretty much single screen puzzle games. So if you haven't seen this, the best way to describe it is you are given a scene where a crime has been committed. So like the first one, the level where they train you is somebody has been strangled inside a building. And so you get the image of this person getting strangled. And then you can click on different elements within the scene, and that will bring up potentially different information. So you click on the guy who gets strangled, and like there's his wallet, and you can open the wallet, and there's stuff inside there. And investigating all this, you're collecting words. So those words might be names, or they might be places, or they might be items. And then after you've collected all of that, you have a sort of like puzzle, which is basically just like a sentence with a bunch of blanks in it, and you have to fill in those blanks. So you have to say, Paul James was strangled by Bill Jones using a piece of clothing from his shirt, and this took place in the he was working as a prison guard at the time. And so you're filling in those keywords in there out of the words that you have found. So you're using context clues within the scene to figure it out, to put the puzzle together. So the best way to think of it, have you ever done those logic puzzles where it's like Bill is older than Betty, but he's younger than June? And
yes.
His favorite candy is not the M&Ms or the Butterfinger, right? And you have to like use the little boxes to check off and everything.
Yeah, there was a Wordle variant that I did of that for a while.
Yeah, so that's basically what this game is, but it's really good. Like it's one of those games that when you figure out a puzzle, sort of like Wordle or some of those New York Times crossword puzzle games, you feel really, really smart when you get it right. But you can also feel really frustrated and dumb when like you can't figure out like, how do I make this connection? Like I see this person has died. How do I explain how they died? I'm not making the connection that the game wants me to make. So I've done the first few cases in there, and the cases get bigger and more elaborate. And so there'll be multiple cases tying together to make a bigger case. And so it's really neat so far. Like it's something, Alicia, like you might like because you like the, you were just talking about the Phoenix Wright series and everything. So there's some similarity to that. Maybe without all the like backstory and characterization. This is much more of a, hey, look at this and solve this puzzle. But like there is some story being developed as you go along. But yeah, really cool game. I'm enjoying it so far. I think as it gets more complicated, I'll probably get more into it as it goes. The third game that I played is Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. So this was the game that when they first showed a trailer for it, I assumed it was DLC because like they're surely not putting out a new Microsoft Flight Sim. But this is a whole new game. It's separate from the last one. It has improved graphics and everything. This is also the one where they had all the different ways that you could kind of interact. So there are things like you're a crop duster, or you are piloting a helicopter trying to put out wildfires. So like all these different ways to interact with a flight sim, not just fly from point A to point B. So I haven't gotten super into this. I played a little bit of it before Thanksgiving break. And I'll tell you the thing that's the really coolest part of this product so far to me. It uses Bing Maps in order to create the world. So you can literally fly anywhere in the world. And
From
it is
Bing Maps?
Yeah. So like from the
It's Microsoft.
right.
Okay.
Well,
I'm laughing at myself making that connection. I was
Yeah.
like, why would they use Bing Maps instead of like Google Maps? Because it's Microsoft.
Because they own it, right?
Yep.
And
I just needed a second for that to connect.
I understand. Somebody like it's like what was in the Spider-Man movies where he uses Bing, and you're like, why is this like super smart kid using Bing? Nobody uses Bing. And you're like, oh, right, because it's a movie and they paid Sony money.
Yep.
But anyway, so like what's really cool is like I can put in the local airport, and as far as I've seen so far, every airport is in this game. And so you can take off from like the Marion Airport, or you can take off from the Paducah Airport. And when you take off, it has recreated the environment using those Bing maps. And it tries to extrapolate the map data into a 3D world. So like where it sees trees, it inserts 3-dimensional trees. And where it sees buildings, it creates a 3-dimensional building. So I was able to take off from the Paducah Airport, which I've flown out of multiple times, and fly down through Paducah, like fly over the mall area. And I was able to pick out specific buildings, like that's the Kohl's, and that's this, right? That's the Walmart. And it doesn't have the signage, but it also has cars traveling along the roads and everything. And so I was able to fly down to the foot of Broadway and see all of that. And then I was able to fly out to my parents' house and see that. And just that ability, right, to be able to literally fly anywhere. So like some things aren't going to be super detailed because they haven't built it in. But some areas like Las Vegas or New York or Paris, like they've spent more time to recreate those environments. There's something really cool about that. And it was almost the same sort of experience I had the first time I had the Vive VR headset and was using it at home, and there was a Google Maps app for it. And you could like go in and look at things on Google Map in virtual reality and 3D. And there was this, so like you're down on your knees and kind of like looking over like you're a giant looking at this world below you. And that created a really weird sensation when I was looking at like my grandparents' old house that like I grew up, spending my summers at and like playing in the backyard. And then we'd go over and cut through this neighbor's backyard to get over to this side street to go to the grocery store. And you're looking at all this and it creates like an emotional response for me, at least in doing this. This sort of does the same thing in that like it feels like you are physically visiting these places in an airplane, right? But like, you're not limited to flying the airplane safely. So you can fly down just like buzzing over the treetops and over the cars and stuff. That's a really cool experience. And it makes this a more interesting product than traditional flight sims have been for me. Because traditional flight sims, like, I'm never going to be the guy who buys the yoke and pedals and all that and gets super into flight sims. Mm-hmm. But as a casual, this makes this something where, yeah, I want to go fly over every place I've ever lived. And I want to go fly over places I've wanted to visit and like see them from this experience. And so I think that'll keep me busy with it for a while. And I know there have been some problems with bugs and different things that a lot of people have had with this product. I have not had any of those problems so far. My understanding is they've got those worked out now. But like when I was even playing it before they had done these latest patches, I was not having those same problems. And it's just a really cool product. I mean, you know, the idea you can type in any airport in the world, basically, or at least in the U.S., and fly out of it, and, you know, see the world, recreate it, you know, decently accurately, is really cool. And it makes me kind of wonder, like, who's going to take this tech next and build a racing game out of it, where you're like driving across the country and the entire country is recreated. Like, that was the premise of the Crew, but they couldn't recreate the whole country. You look at Microsoft and you go, do you make a Forza game where you've recreated the entire country? And that would be pretty cool if they did something like that. All right, let's move on to the news. And we've been off a couple of weeks, so we have a lot of news here. But let's start with the Game Awards. The Game Awards are next Thursday, and they have released all the nominations, but we're just going to look at Game of the Year nominations. So we have Astrobot, Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Metaphor ReFantazio. So those are your nominations. I think we may have talked about this on the last episode, or mentioned it. I can't remember if they came out before or after that. I feel like we did talk about it because I feel like no, maybe this was in our private chat.
I say we at least talked about it in the group chat.
Yeah, maybe that's it, because I'm thinking of Christina mentioning Black Myth Wukong kind of being a surprise on that list. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What are your reactions to this list? Any surprises? Anything that you feel like shocked has been left off?
I don't know about shocked that has been left off. I understand that it's probably like massive. I'm still going to be old man and say DLC should not be nominated for Game of the Year and take Elden Ring off.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sure it's incredible. That this is not anything about its quality, but
DLC should just be in a DLC category.
And that's kind of what people were talking about, is like, should there just be a new category that is best DLC? Because to me, you can't just buy Shadow of the Erdtree. Like, you have to have Elden Ring proper.
It's not Miles Morales, where that was an expand alone, essentially.
And so, like, that's the one of all of these that I would say I would have rather seen something else in there instead of it. What? No idea, but something else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm surprised. Like, these nominations come in large part from game journalists. Mm-hmm. But I was a little surprised at Balatro getting nominated. I think it's entirely deserved. I think that's going to end up on a lot of people's best of the year list. Mm-hmm. But also, the Game Awards often sort of lean towards those bigger AAA games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So seeing a small, like, I don't think Vampire Survivor got nominated.
No. I mean, it feels like maybe not every year, but every few years you'll get one of those really small indie titles that gets nominated.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because of it, you know, being one of my favorites, but I know Celeste was nominated for Game of the Year from the Game Awards. Mm-hmm.
And it should be. Like, like,
in 2018 was a pretty stacked year, but
right. And I obviously, I 100%, you know, anybody's listened to this podcast, I'm a huge fan of Balatro. I think it belongs on this list. But I was pleasantly surprised that it made the cut, because I feel like there's games that are bigger, more high profile, certainly developers, publishers who are investing in advertising for this award ceremony, that you feel like, well, okay, so you're not completely selling out. You are like trying to pick the best games.
I know the other one that I saw people talking about as like should it just be its own category is like a best remake or remaster category.
Final Fantasy.
For Final Fantasy. I mean, like that is so different than
gonna say,
other. So like
that's very different from like, The Last of Us redone or.
Yeah, I'm not
like
super
that,
mad at it. I wouldn't necessarily hate it getting its own category. But that's one that I think I would say transcends beyond something like an Elden Ring.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would expect like Crisis Core Reunion. I wouldn't nominate for Game of the Year since it's a remake, but like Rebirth is such its own thing that really. I mean, obviously it's inspired by the original game and it takes a lot from it, but it is so much bigger than what the original game gave, that I'm like, yeah, that one deserves to be in Game of the Year rather than like a remake category.
Yeah, because I feel like that game in particular, even more so than something like the Resident Evil 4 remake that came out last year, that was much beloved and might have been nominated for Game of the Year. I can't remember.
I think it was. I think the one. Sorry if I'm going to cut you off really quick, but like people were talking about it as a comparison to like the Silent Hill 2 remake,
right?
Which I would honestly say is probably closer to the Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth than like the 1,000 Year Door remake that we got.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I feel like the Final Fantasy 7 sort of remake trilogy, right, that they're putting out, is much more akin to what you would think of a remake in film being, right? Like when you remake a movie, it's an entirely new cast, it's an entirely new script, it's an entirely new director and sets, and you basically start over from scratch.
Yeah.
And you're using the same basic premise, but you're building an entirely new movie around it. And that's really what they've done with Final Fantasy VII, versus something like 1,000 Year Door, which is more like a, hey, we are putting this out on 4K Blu-ray for the first time, and we are remastering the film, and we're adding, we're cleaning up, the picture and everything, and like that's how that feels much more. I know it's more than that, and games and film you can't make that direct connection to, but like this really feels like a new game based on that old game than just what we traditionally think of as a remake or a remaster.
Yeah, I think to use that same logic, like Final Fantasy VII, whatever was the original one called, remake and Rebirth compared to original Final Fantasy VII is like the new Dune movies compared to the old Dune movies.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's where it's like, in this case, I don't necessarily mind it, but I do think with how often we get remakes and remasters that it should get its own category.
I was gonna say, I think you're right. Like having a category for it would be good. I just don't. I just think that people on the internet are wrong if they think Rebirth should be in that category.
Well, maybe it belongs in that category too.
Yeah,
right? Like,
it could be a multiple.
That's true.
The way that Balatro has like it's. I imagine
it's
to
best
me,
indie game
if it's in best game of the year, it probably should win best indie game.
right.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
But yeah, I mean that's always, how many categories are you going to make? I think we're at a point now where remakes are so common that really celebrating the people that do it the best. Something like a Silent Hill 2 this year, right? Like that's a pretty amazing remake of that game, but it's also a pretty faithful remake, for the most part, much more so than Final Fantasy VII is.
Yeah.
But like there's still, I think it's worthwhile to acknowledge that because there's something really cool being done there. And the same way with like DLC, there's some really cool DLC getting released. I mean, that Alan Wake 2 DLC, there's been a lot of positive buzz over that. So, you want people to be able to, spotlight that, which is what all these awards are really about, right? They're about spotlighting and shining a light on a lot of these games. I think something like Balatro, this is a really big win for it because that's the sort of game that the more casual audience doesn't know about. Mm-hmm. You know, like that casual audience, they know about Astrobot because there's a big marketing campaign behind it, right? They know about Final Fantasy because, you know, everything Final Fantasy carries a cachet around it. Mm-hmm. But something like Astrobot, they don't know about. Balatro, they don't know about. And so I think, just being nominated, you know, you say sometimes it's just nice to be nominated. I think in this case, for the developer of Balatro, I'm betting for his, you know, pocketbook, this is very nice just to be nominated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm really looking at some of the stuff that came out in 2024. I think for me personally, the one I would have loved to have seen get nominated would have been a Helldivers. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, yeah, was Helldivers only this year?
That was this year.
Dang.
I think that's a game, it's sort of like the Oscars. That's a game that suffered from peaking too early in the year. Like, if that game had come out in September, I think it's on this list.
I think that's especially with how big it was.
Right.
And, like, how much, like, community there was around it. I know the one that I don't know. I mean, I played it, and I do think it's a good game, but I don't know if the people who are complaining about it are complaining about it because it was a good game, or they're complaining about it for the reasons they were complaining about it earlier in the year. But I know people were upset that Stellar Blade didn't get nominated as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, it's, you know, the last two Zelda games have been nominated for Game of the Year. Is a little surprising that,
Echoes.
Echoes of Wisdom is not nominated. But it's a very good year for games. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure
Echoes of Wisdom, people haven't flipped out about the way they did, like, Tears of the Kingdom.
Sure, yeah. I mean, but still, every time a new Zelda game comes out, it's usually a pretty big deal, right? And so the fact that we have a Game of the Year where that game is not in contention, I think says a lot about the competition this year. That, you know, it's really a tough competition. Yeah. Prince of Persia is not on this list. You know, that's been one of my favorites from this year.
I know people really got into Tekken. I mean, people always get really into Tekken. I am glad to see, but I mean, as we have talked about, I think we talked about it last year. It is nice to see some surprises on here. Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily think Black Myth was much of a surprise just because I saw how many people were playing it. I am surprised Metaphor got nominated because that's essentially a Persona game, and those games are like 1 billion hours long.
Right.
Yeah.
So like to see something like that get nominated, I think is kind of incredible.
Though the people I know who have actually played that game, just praise that game to no end. Like that game is just the most amazing experience.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I'm still surprised that it would get that because that feels still like a fairly niche gaming experience where if you are playing that or another one that was released this year, the Persona 3 Reload, I think it was what it was called. Like those are such a commitment to play. And so.
Well, I think, when you talk about the sort of games that are getting nominated, I think it's worth looking at genre here. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 RPGs with Metaphor and Final Fantasy VII. We have
different kinds of RPGs with 7 being a action RPG and being sort of traditional turn-based.
Yeah.
But, like a remake of maybe one of the most classic of Japanese role-playing games, right?
Yeah.
And then we have 2 Souls-likes with Black Myth and Elden Ring. We have Astrobot, which is like sort of the epitome of the platformer.
Yeah, 3D platformer.
And then we have Balatro, which is like a little weird game that doesn't, like it's a card game, sort of. Yeah, like it's sort of a poker game, maybe, but...
Roguelike is maybe your...
Right. Like
that still doesn't... That doesn't give the most, that's still not the best explanation if that's the only word you're able to use.
I mean, coming into 2024, if somebody had told you that a poker game was going to be nominated for Game of the Year over the new Zelda.
Yeah, a poker game made by one guy.
Right. Like, I mean...
Had like $15 in his bank account when he made it.
Yeah, I mean...
It's insane. It's beautiful.
It would blow your mind, right? And the fact that we've had this, I talk to people all the time who are still playing, almost every day, Stardew Valley.
Yeah.
That game's been out for years, and people are still playing it. And, of course, they're still updating it, right?
Yep.
Same thing with Vampire Survivors. We see more and more, and these are all examples of games made by one person, but like more and more of these like very tiny teams putting out games that sort of just capture the imagination of people and, like not always recognized with awards or even nominations, but certainly with sales. And I think that's really cool. That's a really cool place to be in the game industry today. Because, like some of these games are very, very big budget games. Like certainly Final Fantasy, that is a huge budget game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine Final Fantasy and Elden Ring are probably pretty big budgets.
Yeah, and then you have kind of more, I think, probably a mid-tier platformer in Astrobot, but still a AAA sort of game.
Yeah.
And then you have this like little tiny indie, and they're all in there competing together. And I think that's really cool. And I think that says something positive about the game industry and where we are.
I will say, I think the other thing, and maybe this is my like being a little detached from like whatever mainstream discourse around games is happening. Last year, it felt like a 2-game race between Baldur's Gate and Breath of the Wild 2,
Tears
whatever it's called.
We knew what you meant.
Yeah. This year feels pretty open. I mean, I don't know. Again, and maybe this is just me being more detached. There's none of these that stand out as like, this is clearly gonna run away with it.
Yeah,
and maybe that's also me not wanting Elden Ring to win because I don't want the DLC to win.
Sure.
No, but I think there's something to like, obviously I look and say, okay, well, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is my favorite of these, but I don't think it's a runaway. Like, honestly, if I was going to give any of based on just what I see people talk about and play the most, it would probably be Balatro. And that's like wild. But then I'm also like, well, Astrobot has, everybody loves that game, and it has so much nostalgia in like all the old PlayStation things. So yeah, I think I'm with you where I'm like, there's no, I don't know how it's gonna shake out.
I mean, again, it's the games media that is voting for this. I know like people can go on their website and vote, and I think that counts like 10% towards the final vote. Mm-hmm. I would personally be shocked if it's not Astrobot or Metaphor. Those seem like the front runners to me.
Interesting.
Like I think Shadow of the Erd Tree has won its award in being nominated. And I think the people who nominated that were probably very happy to see it get on here, and then they're going to look at it and go, well, that's a DLC. Like, does it deserve Game of the Year? And I think a lot of times people like have these sort of negotiations in their head, like we do in our Game of the Year discussions, right? There's always that game where we're like, we're just happy to get it on the top 10 list. Mm-hmm. And like, we don't care if it goes any further than the 10th place game on that list. We just want it to get onto the list. And so, and I think there is that bias towards a sort of AAA big game. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to that, I think those two fit it best, right? Because I think Final Fantasy runs into the same problem that something like Lord of the Rings does at the Oscars. Like, which of those games do you give Game of the Year to? I was going
to say, the third one will be when everything happens for that game, I think.
Because
really, if you give it to this one, then you have to give it to the third one almost.
Well, because really that's a 3-part game,
Sure.
right? Like, I mean, you can say, well, they're individual, they stay on their own, but like much like any trilogy, like they collectively stand together. You know, and so I also feel like that's a game that a lot of people really liked, but a lot of people had, you know, some very strong, very outspoken issues with it at the same time. So I would be surprised if one of those other two don't win it, but I've been surprised before. Like It Takes Two won, and I was shocked when that game won. So I think probably the one that has the most outside chance of like being the upset is Balatro, because almost everybody I know who plays that game falls in love with it. And I think that's going to end up on a whole lot of top 10 list this year.
Yep.
Whereas I will probably not play Metaphor Fantasio this year, even though I want to. I just don't think I'll have the time to get it in. That's like 100+ hour commitment, like you said.
Yeah.
All right. Sony is reportedly in talks to acquire. Anybody have a guess on
Kadokawa?
Kadokawa.
The parent company of From Software. So we should note that this company also is very involved in anime and manga.
Yeah.
And the publication of that. So they're
more anime than manga, but yeah.
So there is some reason they would do this, because they have consolidated all the anime into Crunchyroll.
Yes,
so that
they
have this one subscription service that you could get. When you start thinking of that, you start thinking of something like what DC tried to do a few years ago, where they had what was their subscription service? Was DC Unlimited, something like that?
Yeah.
And they had TV shows, but they also had the access to the comics. So you start to look at it and go, well, they have all the anime. This further consolidates that, but you also add in the manga. So do you add that, like, that's part of the subscription for Crunchyroll, or is it an add-on so you can have all this manga that you could, view digitally as well?
It'll be a higher tier subscription for Crunchyroll, I'm sure. It's just, ugh.
So, like, I could see that, right? But obviously for our interest, the thing for a video game podcast probably more of interesting is, are they buying, this in part also to get From Software? And obviously, like, we're talking about Elden Ring. Here is them potentially buying the company that owns Elden Ring, and also the Souls games, and also
Bloodborne is already PlayStation exclusive, but yeah.
Right, but one of the reasons we haven't gotten a PS5 update or PS5 version of that is because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from Software, instead of them like going out and making their own game that they fully own.
Yeah.
Right, because they co-own that with Sony. Now Sony would fully own it.
What is the other one? Sekiro is there as well.
Yeah, that's the other big one. And don't forget Kingsfield. Good old Kingsfield.
I don't even know what that is.
It was their series for the PlayStation 1. I think maybe they made one for the PlayStation 2 as well. But it's like the precursor to all these games. Like, you go back and play Kingsfield now, and you're like, oh, this is how they get to Dark Souls.
I know they did all the mech games. What is it? Armored Core.
Yeah.
Yeah. This seems like it's pretty massive. FromSoft seems like one of, if not like the biggest developer out right now. It seems like whatever they put out is kind of guaranteed to get a Game of the Year nomination. In many ways, some of the most highly anticipated games whenever they're announced.
They feel like Blizzard of 15 years ago.
That's fair.
Or we could say Rockstar maybe today, though Rockstar puts out a new game every like 4 years at this point. But they feel like they're publishing, a fair number of games, and every one of those games is like both a critical and financial success.
Yeah.
Or seem to be. Yeah, I mean, and, like, this seems like this would be a big deal for Sony, right? As they continue to kind of shore up that position in the game industry where they are the dominant console brand.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about it as a Bloodborne remaster. Every time you hear about a Bloodborne 2, as people sort of yearning for that. So I'm sure that would make that easier as well.
Well, there's some other news about Sony here. PlayStation is said to be working on a new portable PlayStation 5. I've heard this a couple of ways. Either it's a portable PlayStation, but like more commonly it's a portable PlayStation 5. They have said that this is something that would be several years down the road. So like, don't expect this to come out next fall. This is much more something you should expect, probably I would think even 2027.
My brain isn't working. When we say portable, we mean like handheld?
Yes.
Like a PSP style? Okay.
Yeah. So this would be a new PSP or more likely, right? Like something akin to the Switch.
Yeah. Okay.
And right now, I mean, there's a lot of things standing. Like the amount of power in a PlayStation 5 right now would be very difficult to do with a handheld and the battery drain that it would have.
Yeah. It would be cool to see them pull it off, though.
Well, we've talked about, Xbox is obviously very openly talking about they're developing a portable Xbox. Now Sony's talking about it. It seems like with the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally and these other portable PC, that these companies feel like this is an area they can't, not be part of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of demand there is for it. Like, the Switch works because that's Nintendo's only console.
I'm kind of wondering, like, would it really be a portable PS5 or would it be a portable PS6?
Well, I think just power-wise, right? Like, people are saying they would have more difficulty doing a portable PlayStation 6. But, when you look at something like the Steam Deck, certainly that has sold decently, but it's not something where everyone I talk to has a Steam Deck. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not like it's something that just took over the world. Certainly, I don't think it's anywhere comparable to the success that the Switch is.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, like, this feels like, well, we're going to do this because we feel like we need to do it more than we necessarily have a very firm plan in place. Which honestly is what the PlayStation Portal kind of felt like. It felt like, hey, we have this tech. We've developed it. We're going to put this out there. I would say the PSVR 2 even felt that way from Sony. Hey, we have this tech. We need to put it out there. We don't really necessarily have a clear idea what we want to really do with it going forward.
In many ways, the Portal almost feels like it makes more sense than a portable PS5 because at least, again, we talked about the ideal situation of the Portal is somebody's using the TV and someone else can play the PS5 at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'd ever really travel with one though. Like, I mean, obviously you can't travel with the Portal, but because there aren't a ton of games where I'm like, I would want to play this on a mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Astro Bot, I'm not yearning to play Resident Evil 4 remake on a mobile on a portable platform, whereas Steam at least has all of your indie games available. The Switch, Nintendo emphasizes that in a lot of their design, whereas I just don't see that in the games that Sony is making and prioritizing as being the ideal way to play them.
Yeah, because when I travel, I don't always want to take my laptop with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can take my Steam Deck and connect that to a TV and play a game or even something like the Jackbox, right? Around the holidays. Take your Steam Deck, connect it to the TV, and you can play your Jackbox games. I don't know. And then when you start factoring the price, right? Are you going to buy a PlayStation 5 at $500, then turn around and buy a portable PlayStation 5 for $500 more dollars. It wouldn't be anything less than that.
I mean, I guess.
Or in the case that you were making, Alicia, when the PlayStation 6 comes out and now you're buying that plus a portable PlayStation 5, which is cool, but like, is there a big enough market for people who are going to throw around that kind of money?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I tend to lean handheld over console just for convenience, because like a lot of the time I do play more like, hey, I'm sitting in my office and I have 20 minutes versus like I'm sitting down at home and I can ignore my cat for a while and sit down and play. So like a portable PS5 kind of sounds more appealing to me than spending $500 on a console PS5. But like you said, the big thing for me is like this is probably not going to come out until the PS6 is nearly out, if not out already. So then like, do you buy a portable for the ease of it being portable if it's a generation behind and you're still not getting like brand new games on it?
Right. And of course there's always the question too, right, of brand new games. Is it going to end up being much like it was this generation, where the first 2 or 3 years everything is cross-platform?
Yeah.
I mean, outside of what, Ratchet and Clank, I think that was one of the few exceptions. Yeah, I don't know. Since we're talking about PlayStation Portal, it is getting an update, or has gotten an update that will allow it to not just stream from your console, but stream from Sony's streaming service, so that you could play So as you were mentioning traveling, Mario, that you could be traveling, you wouldn't have to worry about your PlayStation at home being on and connected, right? You could just stream the games. This was always the issue that was most bizarre to me about the Portal when they launched it. Like, why did it not have this feature from day one? This seemed like, maybe not the killer feature to make me go buy a PlayStation Portal, but it certainly seemed like the feature that would make this a much more worthwhile investment for a larger number of people, right? That it can stream from your PlayStation 5, but it can also stream from Sony servers, and you could play a game that way. And suddenly that makes, I've been critical of the Portal. I do not own one. You own one. So like, I know you've said you enjoy it quite a bit. I've been critical of it because I just didn't feel like for me personally, the value was there. This moves it much closer to that value being there, and me understanding why somebody would invest, $200 in one of these.
Yeah, and I mean, I got it because it was on sale, and so like even for me, like that value was increased by that. But I mean, knowing that this is a thing, it's pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I still wish that thing had like an onboard memory and everything. So like maybe PlayStation 1 games, it could emulate locally and play those. I feel like maybe that would be a really killer feature for that. But yeah, this makes that system make a whole lot more sense to me. Not just buying it personally, but like also its place in Sony's bigger sort of strategy.
Yeah.
Right. This makes the Sony streaming services make a whole lot more sense, because now all of a sudden I feel like there's a much more better use case for that sort of thing. So that's really cool. It's always cool when something like that comes out and you're like, I don't know about this thing. And then they actually like do something that improves it, that you're like, okay, I get it better now. Like this, this seems like a much more worthwhile item. Let's see. PlayStation 5, for the 30th anniversary of the PlayStation brand, is getting a limited time PlayStation 1 boot up. So you can go in and set this, and it will, when your PlayStation 5 turns on, it will do the PlayStation 1 boot up. The like very famous like Sony logo and the like doo-doo-doo, and the sound and everything. It'll play all that in there.
I think, aren't they also doing PS2 boot up as well?
They're having they're having some customization for all their systems, like the PS2, 3, and 4. I haven't played around with it, so I don't know what all those do quite yet. I think this is really cool. They're saying this is for a limited time, and I know that lots of fans online have been like, no, you should just make this a feature.
Yeah.
This is something that we desperately want.
I'll say I'm so ready to go home and like hang out with my sister and turn on the PS5 and just get the nostalgic PS2 boot up sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think why not, right? Like, and I think even this makes more sense of, hey, we're not doing this at launch. You're going to get used to the PlayStation 5, but then after it's been out a few years, we're going to introduce this, and you can kind of customize to whichever one of these you like best.
We'll throw you that nostalgia bone.
I mean, I could even see, like, I don't know that this exists in there, but it would be neat to have a randomized feature. So, like, you never know which one it's going to boot up as.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun way to do it. So, that's pretty neat of them to do. That's 2 positive Sony stories in a row. Like, good on Sony. There have been more Switch 2 rumors. Of course, these always should be taken with a grain of salt. So part of this feels a little bit more justified. So there is a video that is reportedly out of China. It was posted to a Chinese video site that shows somebody using the PlayStation or the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, right? And so these resemble the Joy-Cons as they've been rumored to be different and everything, including the magnetic attachment feature. That video is very suspicious because it's real low quality, and it's sort of like, you know, in this day and age when people get video of Bigfoot and it's still like all blurry, and you're like, you have like a 4K camera on your phone. Why is this video blurry? So this video is blurry like that, and you're like, why is this blurry?
The Switch 2 is honestly more elusive than Bigfoot at this point.
Well, yeah, that may be where it's hanging out right now. Bigfoot has the only like prototype of the Switch 2. So that happened, and then there was also some third-party peripherals for the Switch 2 that have leaked online, which, you know, with the delay of the Switch 2, we know it was delayed. That sort of makes sense. These companies would have already been producing this to like get it out there, and then when it got delayed, there's nothing they could do. Like that had already been like negotiated with factories.
And that's like the carrying case and that kind of stuff, right?
Right. So that all seems to point to that, you know, obviously they've said there will be an announcement by the end of the first quarter. That's March. But some people think this would be a January announcement with a March release, which seems like a really quick turnaround.
Yeah.
But a January announcement makes sense that they would hold off the announcement till after Christmas because they want to sell as many Switch 1s as possible this Christmas season.
Yeah.
Then as soon as Christmas is over, announce the Switch 2. I don't know if I believe, you know, a March release for that at this point.
I'd say I would think a summer release would be more likely.
Yeah, that could be
because then you have all the kids getting out of school being like, hey, I need something to do with my summer days. And we can't go play outside.
And that could be like a May release.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard to know. These are, of course, just more rumors. But it is interesting to like sort of think about. Night Dive Studio has stealth released The Thing remastered. We knew this was coming, but they stealth released it yesterday. Just put it out there. So if you want to play The Thing game that came out in the early 2000s, that is now available in a remastered version, and supposedly pretty good remastered version from what I've heard so far. Less good news for Foam Stars. They have announced that the next season of Foam Stars will be its last. and they are going to make all the content available when that season comes out. And so that will be it for new content for Foam Stars. This is, if you remember, the Square Enix take on...
it was kind of the Splatoon.
Yeah, Splatoon game. Is, you're trying to cover area, but doing it with foam instead of paint. I played a little of that game. It's neat. It just is a game. It's like a lot of these games, it got lost in the shuffle, right? Like there wasn't an audience there to find it. Let's go ahead and talk about it. It's a couple down here on the list, but speaking of live service games shutting down, Ubisoft is shutting down X-Defiant. So X-Defiant was their free-to-play shooter game as a service that was taking all their properties. So it had Splinter Cell and all these sort of different game properties and mashing them up and together into a Call of Duty style shooter. They have been testing this for a very long time, and they finally put it out, and now they're scrapping it. So this is another very high profile, very heavily invested in game as a service game that is getting shut down. So not quite as catastrophic as Concord, but same basic result, that this game did not do what it needed to do.
Yeah.
Illphonic has announced layoffs. Illphonic are the ones who made the new Friday the 13th asymmetrical game. They also made a Killer Clowns one. They made Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed and Predator Hunting Ground. They have done a lot of, licensed property asymmetrical multiplayer games. That has been their niche over the last few years. And I'll say most of those games have been good. From what I've seen other people play, and then the ones I played myself, I've mentioned on here before, I'm a big fan of that Friday the 13th game. I think that's really a lot of fun. But they did not disclose how many layoffs, but more, obviously some layoffs. I don't think that Killer Clowns game did what they were hoping it would do. I think that was always... That was always a weird bet because that's such an obscure property for people today.
I feel like Christina talked about it.
Yeah.
But I only know it from her talking about it.
And I feel like, I don't know, Alicia, is that even a property you were familiar with before we talked about it?
I had heard of it before, but it was kind of it lives in the same space in my brain as Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Where I just fully expect that it only exists for Rift Tracks to do a thing with it. Or Mystery Science Theater 3000 if it was pre-Rift Tracks days. But I don't. Yeah, and possibly, I'm not a fan of horror movies, whether they're good movies or B movies. It's not my vibe. So that could also contribute to me not really knowing it, but yeah, it's very much something that I'm it lives in that space in my head. And then
sure,
Christina started talking about it, and I was like, oh, wait, this is a actual thing.
Yeah, so the reason I asked that is, right, you're younger than Christina and me, but you're not also a little kid. And if you're not super familiar with it, only in name,
yeah.
Right? I just wonder how much of an audience that property brings with it. That's not at least my age or Christina's age, right? So kind of on more the high end of your mainstream gaming demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously always, layoffs are a sad thing to hear. Former PlayStation executive Sean Layden has stated in an interview that games should be shorter as development costs are, quote, not sustainable in their current form. So this is him saying what we've been saying on this podcast quite a bit over the last year, I feel like, as layoffs have really taken off. You know, when we talked about Spider-Man 2 with a $300 million budget, that games of that budget level are just not sustainable.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make those sorts of games, and you certainly can't miss with those sorts of games. And obviously Spider-Man 2 did well, but like for every Spider-Man 2, we know there's been some high-profile misses. And
for every Spider-Man 2, there's a Gollum.
Right. And his basic argument here is that maybe these games need to be smaller if you're going to invest in them at this scale, right? If you're going to put in the production values and the size of a team that it takes to make a Spider-Man 2, does that game need to be half the length so that you can cut, if not half the cost, at least a substantial part of the cost of that game? And that also ties into the whole issue we've talked about, that, you know, game development times have gone from a couple years to 3 years to 4 years to now where a lot of games are 5-6+ years in development.
Mm-hmm.
So a studio may only produce one game a console generation, which is also seems unsustainable, like financially, unless you're just making the biggest game in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. In 1 week of release, Dragon Quest III HD 2D became Japan's best-selling game of 2024.
That is wild, and I love that for them.
So, you know, Dragon Quest is the series that there's the old story that the Japanese government forced, it would have been Enix at the time, to release those games on the weekend because too many kids and too many people skipped out on work and school to go buy the game and play it all day. So they were like, hey, you got to move this to Saturday releases so it doesn't interfere with business and school. So it's not shocking knowing that, but it is kind of surprising that that game series still holds that cachet in Japan to hit in 1 week to be the #1 best-selling game in Japan. This is the same year that Metaphor ReFantazio came out, right? Which
and
is
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Yeah, which are very big names. I mean, I know Metaphor isn't, but as you noted earlier, Persona very much is.
Yeah. No, that's delightful, and I love that for them.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. You know, that's not a series that is nearly as big here, but it's always pretty amazing to realize how big it is in Japan.
Well, and I think it's one of those, you know, we talk sometimes about like the games that we don't talk about because we're not playing them, but how big they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this just feels like another example of that, where it's like, oh yeah, we don't really, like, we didn't make a big deal out of this announcement, like because none of us are playing it, but holy moly, is it a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting from another level, right? We often talk about that because we're talking about something like Roblox because it's being played by kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're aged out of the group that would be playing that. And I think something like this is really interesting because it's a cultural thing, right? Like the biggest game in Japan might be very different than the biggest game in the U.S. or in, you know, Germany or wherever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, we don't think anything of that happening with film. And, you know, we shouldn't really think anything of that happening with video games. Of course, different video games are going to appeal differently culturally, right? And the idea that this game is really big in Japan, like, it doesn't shock me. But again, within a week, does shock me a little that it sold that well. And I'm super... You know, you say none of us have played it yet. I'm super excited to play that game at some point. It's a remake, so it's a game where I'm like, well, I don't have to play it by the end of the year because it's not going to be Game of the Year contention, right?
Yeah.
In the same way. So, like, maybe that's a game I play, you know, early into next year sometime.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to play it because I think that game looks gorgeous. Let's see. We can probably skip these last two stories. I don't think anybody's really interested in them. How about you, Mario? Any interest?
Nah.
No, okay. Well, we'll just skip over those. Well, Alicia, do you know anyone who might be interested in those last two stories?
Just a little bit. Not like I sent you the Sly Cooper one or anything.
So Sky Cooper 2 and 3.
Sly Cooper.
Have been announced that they're coming to PlayStation 4 and 5 this month for $10 each.
I'm so excited for this. I love the Sly Cooper games are honestly some of my underrated faves. And I think we had this conversation when OJ was still on the podcast a lot. We talked about, the PS3 ports had some issues in terms of how they were, in terms of the porting messing up the timing on some of the gameplay and all that. And then, Sly 4 was a PS3 game and ended on a cliffhanger. So the fact that we haven't gotten anything, I'm like, the fact that we're getting 2 and 3 on the PS4 and 5, I'm like, please, 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 if it sells well enough, maybe that's what they're looking for to make Sly 5. I'm begging, please.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that they're even mining these games, right? And taking the time to, because there is some work to, these are going to be emulated versions, but there is some work that goes into this on their end. So, even the fact that they feel like this is worth their time, worth the effort, to me speaks to that they're not entirely against the idea of doing something with this franchise.
Well, and especially since, we've talked a lot about how, PlayStation and Xbox really don't do like family-friendly games at this point in their history. And so like bringing back something like Sly Cooper, I honestly feel like Astrobot probably paved the way for this in terms of...
Well, in some not so subtle ways it does. So.
Yeah, I would say... with how much of a love letter it is to the PlayStation history and like it doing so well is now encouraging them to go back and be like, hey, yeah, these games that y'all love, what if we made them playable again?
I think also like one of the things, and we just talked about this with Sean Layden's comments, these sorts of games like the Sly Cooper series, like Astrobot, like, Ratchet and Clank, that for the most part, these are smaller budget games. Mm-hmm. They take less development time. Like, if you make a Sly Cooper 4, you're not spending $300 million and 6 years of development time on it. You are trying to pump that game out, and I would imagine a couple years development time on a, certainly a sub $100 million budget.
Yeah.
And so not just that it appeals to families, but like it appeals to that sort of diversification of their portfolio, I would imagine.
Yeah. Of
let's make some of these like games that will be more of a double, right? Instead of trying to hit a home run with everything that we put out.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you told me Sly 5 had a budget of $100 million, I would laugh and be like, why? Trying too hard.
Well, games cost a lot to make, but yeah, I would imagine they would try to keep that budget as low as possible for this. So that's really cool. Like, anytime games are made more available is always cool because there certainly is a fan base there for that franchise. Speaking of franchises with a fan base, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, this was right before Thanksgiving, I believe, that they put out a new trailer. That trailer in one particular shot shows Shadow the Hedgehog with a gun, which seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but there has been quite a bit of question about, like, would they actually have, in this very family-friendly film franchise, would they have one of the characters carrying around a gun? Which is, I feel like, if this was 30 years ago, you absolutely give him a gun.
Yeah.
In today's age, right, I completely understand why this was a question. It was a question from me. Like, I actually thought, would they try to get around this? Would they try not to give him an actual handgun and give him, like, hey, we gave you a laser gun, something that looked entirely unrealistic, but this looks like he's carrying a Glock.
Yeah. I will say, I have not watched the trailer because this is one of those movies that I'm doing that thing where I only watched the first trailer and I won't watch any more of them because I don't want to spoil all the best moments. But I am. This does have a thumbs up from me. Edgy the Hedgy needs a gun.
And we don't know how this plays out. It may be a situation where a gun falls into his hand and he catches it and goes, "Not for me," and throws it away. It may be one of those sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge moments to the audience.
I would say I could totally see it being he gets a gun and he is why? You think I need this thing? You think I don't have my own power? But
he doesn't use a gun in Sonic Adventure 2, at least not as I remember. I don't think the guns start until the Shadow the Hedgehog
the guns start in Shadow the Hedgehog. They continue a little bit in Sonic 06. But yeah, Shadow the Hedgehog.
He's got a motorcycle in Sonic 06. That is equally I think characteristic of Shadow.
He has that in Shadow the Hedgehog too.
I would say the motorcycle has also crossed over to the Archie comics. So the motorcycle is honestly more standard.
He also curses in Shadow the Hedgehog. So
yeah.
I don't imagine we'll see that in this movie. Though it'd be pretty great.
What's the rating? Is it PG or PG-13?
I think it's PG.
I think it's PG. So we might get
PG-13.
We might get one. Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald? But I doubt that we'll get anything more than that.
Fuck that fox.
I was about to say, I was just if it's PG-13, we just get our one fuck from Shadow the Hedgehog.
No, they would hype it up like it was going to be Shadow, and then they would give it to the totally not Snively Robotnik.
Give it to Tails? How great would that be?
Yeah, I mean, if he has a gun, is there a chance he shoots James Marsden in this film?
Does Shadow commit human murder in the Shadow the Hedgehog games?
Yes. If you play the evil route.
Evil route.
He part of that is taking out gun operatives. That's gun as in GUN, the organization, not gun like the weapon gun.
Well, they also have guns.
Yeah.
The gun operatives are gun operatives.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's taking out literal humans, not just weapons. So, he could kill the sister-in-law and I wouldn't care. But
dang.
I hate her character. She's so obnoxious. But I don't know.
I feel like she was part of the best part of part 2.
No.
So, in a very
wedding?
Yeah.
No.
In a very different film. But
absolutely
very entertaining.
Not. Absolutely not. No. But I feel like it's if they tried to cheat their way out of killing Maria, that's the point when we're come on, don't do this to us. We're all we all are ready to watch a 10-year-old die. We're all ready to watch an anthropomorphic hedgehog have a gun and shoot somebody.
I don't know if you can do that in a PG film.
I think he could probably shoot somebody. I don't know if they'll die from it, but
I don't think he shoots anyone. I think if they give him a gun, I think this turns into very much G.I. Joe. He is missing any humans. He is maybe shooting robots, right? But
Sure.
You're not going to have him shooting any living, breathing character.
It's just Dirty Harry, right.
I don't think he's going
Robotnik, you feel lucky, punk.
I don't think he's going to be Mafia executing anyone. No, Mario.
When the Shadow the Hedgehog movie comes out, though.
I mean, look, I could see Sonic getting shot, and then Supersonic is the way out of that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
I'm just saying.
I'm just wondering from a ratings perspective more than anything.
Yeah, and that's why I'm he certainly won't kill anyone with a gun. But, maybe somebody gets, shot in the leg or something like that. Maybe the GUN operative does. I don't know.
I expect there's very little of the gun in the actual film. I imagine that's probably one scene, and then we move on from the guns. Yeah. That would be my guess.
Probably. But it's funny to imagine nonetheless.
That, or I kind of going back to your original thing, like the fight ends, Shadow picks up a gun and is like, "Oh, this is pretty cool," and then that's it.
That's the end of the film.
That's the end of the film.
He's not saying that's the end of the scene, but
yeah, the movie ends. Start playing Live and Learn.
Well, the other thing is, right, like he's being voiced by Keanu Reeves. Mm-hmm. So then you have to take into consideration there's the John Wick films. So, and do they, John Wick and The Matrix?
Well,
so
and
do you play something off of that, right?
No, you have to play off, because in the first movie, Sonic specifically comments on Keanu in Speed.
Yeah.
So we they need to play off of that.
But I just wonder if, like you play off of that in some way that makes it, you get a joke in there. I think if he does have a gun, if he does actually use the gun, I imagine it's against robots.
Yeah.
No.
And then it seems okay and safe.
I think it's probably most realistic that they give him the gun and he's like, "Why do you think I need this? Like, I'm the ultimate life form. You think I don't need this?" And like gets rid of it.
I mean, there is part of me that would love to see him, tap James Marsden twice in the back of the head in this film. But I don't think, Mario, that's what we're going to get.
Dirty Harry shadow scene.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, okay, that does it for news. And since we're headed into the holidays, our big question for this week is, do you have a favorite holiday memory tied to video games? Mario, do you have a favorite holiday memory tied to video games?
So while it's not a real holiday, when I was a kid,
where is this going?
When I was a kid, we used to do a family reunion every year with like my aunts and uncles and cousins, and so that it felt like a holiday.
Yeah.
And I would bring the GameCube, and all of my cousins, we would Super Smash Bros. Melee and unlocking all the characters. And so cheating a little bit for this answer, but that's my answer.
That sounds good. So how many cousins were there? I've seen pictures of you at weddings with your like million cousins that have gotten married in the last year, I feel.
I think so this would have been my dad's side. It was like 19 first cousins or something like that.
Oh, wow.
My dad had 6 siblings, and all of them, I think there's only, I won't count them all right now, but yeah, it's like 19 on my dad's side.
That sounds like my mom's side. There was like over 20 cousins. So was everyone into Smash Brothers? Was that like the game that everybody wanted to play?
So I will say there's a pretty big age range between those. There's like an older generation, and then there's like our younger generation. But there's like a solid 7 of us within like a 3 or 4 year range, and we would all typically get around Melee. And I think because that was like the best of the multiplayer games we had available to us is the one we would play the most.
No Wave Race?
Mm-mm.
That's disappointing.
I mean, I'm not much of a Wave Race fan. I'm not much of a racing game fan. I think you know this by now. And it doesn't matter if it's
monster trucks,
regular cars, monster trucks, buggies. I don't care.
I mean, I know you don't like it if it's like Beatles, so
yeah. I don't care what type of car it is either. Race cars.
It's just if it's monster trucks, you really dislike it.
Well, that's a fair statement. If it's a monster truck, I'm going in very skeptical. At least if you're expecting me to race them. If I'm crushing things, I'll be willing to give it a little bit more of a leash.
All right. Were you trying to think of a monster truck pun there?
No, I didn't know if you were going to say like, okay, I guess I'll give my one last word.
All right, Alicia.
So I also am sort of cheating on this question, but because it's
Is it also a made-up holiday?
It's not a made-up holiday, but it's not a
made-up video game.
I don't know if I can call this a favorite holiday memory tied to a video game, but so it's 2006. The Nintendo Wii has been released. It's way too expensive for my family to get for Christmas, and so we're talking at school. I'm in 3rd, 4th grade, talking to the boy I have a crush on. And say, my parents said we're not getting one for Christmas, but maybe Santa will bring one for us. And he goes, like, Santa's not real. Like, that's just your parents.
Oh, no, this is like an OJ story. This is going very, depressing and dark.
That was the day I found out Santa wasn't real from the boy I had a crush on in the middle of a conversation.
This is an OJ story.
Did you still have a crush on him?
I still did. Yeah. But yeah, so I had to do the pivot thing of like, well, I know that, but they're going to still say it's from Santa, and then just like quietly weeping in my mind. And then funnily enough, we did get a Nintendo Wii from Santa that year. So I was like, So like I said, less of a favorite holiday memory on that one, but that's a very vivid.
Wait, so when you got it from Santa, did you question whether he was right and think like maybe Santa actually was still real?
No, I'd had my dreams crushed already.
Oh, okay. I like that you take the word of this boy that you had a crush on over your parents and over the actual results of Santa delivering you a Wii.
Yeah, because he had told me that they saw that his family had seen my parents at GameStop or whatever for Black Friday shopping. So I knew that my parents had bought one.
He told you that they bought a Wii?
He told me that they had his family had seen them at Black Friday at GameStop or whatever. And so I don't remember if he saw them buying the Nintendo Wii or if it was just like the assumption.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. So that's one of my most vivid holiday memories. But I will also say for a second memory, because cheating a little to also get like a genuinely nice memory in there. I remember
OJ would not stoop to giving us a nice memory.
That's it. That's all you get.
No, but actually, when I was, it would have been 4 because my birthday is the week after Christmas. So when I was 4 years old was when my sister and I got Game Boy Colors, and she got Pokemon Silver and I got Pokemon Blue, and that was my first video game ever. So Christmas is the time of video games for me.
Blue and Silver? They split generations on you?
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, because she was older. So she got the newer game.
Okay.
But that's also cool because like you can play different games.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have that's a whole other tangent that I'll go on another time about memories of those two games with the two of us. But
all right. So the first one here, I think I may have mentioned before, is getting up and getting my Super Nintendo for Christmas and getting F-Zero with it. And so I got Super Mario World and F-Zero, and I think they rented a game. I can't remember what the game they rented. It might have been like Super Castlevania. They rent it with it. But they had bought, Mario came with it, so they had bought F-Zero. And I remember my brother and sister and I playing it Christmas morning, trying to like set higher scores, and then like going over to my grandparents' house and having Christmas, and then coming home and like trying to beat each other's times on the tracks. And so that continued for quite a while afterwards because we didn't own a whole lot more games for quite a while after that. But I do remember that being a very clear memory of that sort of like competition, right? And like we didn't always have that because particularly my sister didn't play a whole lot of video games. She hit that age where she kind of dropped down, didn't play as many. But I remember that Christmas, like us being really into that. And then so the second one is the one of the Jackbox packs. I forget which one it was, but I remember taking that home one Christmas, and a family friend of ours who we call Aunt Vicky, but like she came over with her sister and their nephew, and it was all my family. And I said, hey, I've got this game. Like we had dinner, we had Festivus dinner, which is something my family does. It has done for like several years, and on Festivus we'll have a dinner, and like, you know, that's kind of our big holiday dinner. And afterwards I said, hey, I've got this game, we should try it. And I hooked my laptop up to the TV in the living room, and we played that. And I just remember it was like one of those great moments of like, hey, everybody's playing a video game and really into it and really enjoying it, and nobody's mad or upset because it's a goofy game. And so even when you're losing, people are having a good time. And, you know, I've had lots of good experiences with the Jackbox games with different groups, but like that was a really good experience at Christmas with people, you know, with Vicky and her sister Vanessa, you know, who are two people who I don't think probably have played a whole lot of video games ever in their life. But like they were really into it. And, you know, it's a good memory to like have. And unfortunately, Vanessa passed away a few years after that. And so it becomes like one of those sort of core memories that you kind of like go back to and go, oh, this was like a really happy memory with this person, and everybody was having a good time. So, yeah, you know, I think the holidays are always a great time to break out video games, especially like cooperative or competitive games that you can play with a group. You know, something like a Smash Brothers that everybody can kind of sit around together. Something like Wii Sports, right? Like Wii Sports, I remember being big hits around the holidays,
or even like Guitar Hero, where
right, yeah,
you know, maybe you're not playing at the same time as each other, but everyone's having a good time watching the other people play and taking turns.
Yeah, it's always like neat to have those kind of experiences. It's very similar to what we do with Playing for Pets, but you know, you're doing it with your family, which hopefully you love and enjoy the company of. But even if you're not, you're doing something which makes it easier, right? People aren't fighting as much if they're playing Guitar Hero, you know, unless somebody's mad because they want to play the drums right now and somebody else is playing it instead. But yeah, so, you know, this is our last episode before the holidays. So for those listening, you know, maybe break out a fun game for the holidays and let us know afterwards. Send us an email. You can always send us an email at justin.young@sau.edu. And we try to read those on the air when we get emails. You can also check out all of our content, including Playing for Pets, by going to salukigames.com and all the back episodes. When we next come back, it will be in full Game of the Year swing. And so that will be our 2 podcast episodes for Game of the Year. It'll be our personal list as well as friends of the podcast and everything. All that will be going up on our website. That'll be sometime around mid-January after we're back to campus and everything from Christmas break. And we will also have a very special, as you heard me at the beginning of this episode say, it's our 98th episode. So when we get back, we'll have a special 100th episode celebration for the podcast. So we're working on something kind of neat and fun for that we think hopefully everyone will enjoy who's been listening to this podcast for a while. So lots of cool stuff coming up with that. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed to all of our social media accounts. We'll try to get all that posted up there. And until then, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Mario. We will be trying to survive the next week of finals. I know for both of you, that also includes taking at least one final. So,
yep, it's gonna be great.
So I know that's always a little rough. So Good luck with that. Good luck to everybody out there who is taking finals, giving finals, or just trying to get through the holiday season and get all that shopping done. We hope that you have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, an awesome Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. We hope that is a very good holiday season for you, and we'll talk to you again in the new year.